See? Am I on? Do I have a... Okay. Here we go. Did you know that the Feast of Shavuot, also known as Pentecost to the Western world, has been celebrated every year, beginning when the children of Yisrael were freed from Mitzrayim? That's the children of Israel were freed from Egypt, right? From that very year to this very day, this celebration has been held somewhere in the world every single year. Did you know that the Seferim Sh'likhim, that's known as the New Testament, the New Testament letters tell us that there were no goyim, no Gentiles. There were none present when the Talmudim, the disciples, with the disciples, I should say, there were no Gentiles with the disciples when the Holy Torah, which is known to the Western world as the Spirit of Holiness and also as the Holy Spirit. But to the Jewish world, the Holy Spirit was the Holy Torah, because the Torah, God called the Torah His Spirit. And if it's the Spirit of God, it's the Holy Spirit. And that's exactly what they're talking about in the New Testament letters. They're talking about the Torah. So when the Torah was poured out on the day of Shavuot, on the day of Pentecost, there were no Gentiles present. We know this because it says it in the New Testament. Did you know that when God gave the children of Yisrael the Torah at Mount Sinai, the people could see the voices, in plural, the voices of God, and His words looked like fire dancing on their tongues? Did you know that Yehezkel, you guys probably know him better as Ezekiel, saw the day of Shavuot spoken about in the letter of Ma'asim? That's, you know it as the letter of Acts, but it's the letter of Ma'asim, which means works, the letter of works. He saw that in a vision. Ezekiel, a guy that the Western world knows as Ezekiel, he saw that in a vision. Did you know, well, yeah, he wasn't the only one too. Did you know that Yehezkel, Ezekiel, did you know his description in Hebrew is almost an exact match to the description found in the Greek text in the letter of Ma'asim or in the letter of Acts? Did you know they're almost identical? Probably not, since English translations of these two verses don't sound anything alike. Basically, the Feast of Shavuot is the celebration of the giving of the Torah. The name of today's message is the Feast of Shavuot, of course. So please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of our scriptures. It's going to be a little long today. Because we're also commanded to go through the law today, so we will do that now. We don't cover ourselves and stand because God commanded us to. It's not a command of God. It's a tradition that we all follow. Back up. Come this way. Over here. Yeah. Because you're getting away from the camera that way. A little technical glitch there. What was I saying? Oh, this covering and this standing up, that's a tradition. But for those of you who are Christian and don't know a lot of the words I'm saying and don't know what I'm talking about, let me put it this way. Jesus and his disciples, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, etc., those people, when somebody read the scriptures, when somebody prayed, when somebody prophesied, everyone, Jesus and all of the disciples, including the Apostle Paul, they all covered their head with one of these. Yes, these existed in their time. They're called talit. In plural, it's talitot. But they covered their heads with these things. Yes, that's what they did. So because he did it, we do it. It's not a command. So if you're not doing it, you're not comfortable with it, don't worry about it. It's not like you're sinning. It's not like you're breaking the law of God. Don't worry about it. It's just something we do in honor of Yeshua, as the Christian world knows him as Jesus, and his Talmudim, his disciples. All right, so in honor of the day of Shavuot, I'm going to read my translation of the 10 suggestions. The 10 Devarim. Devarim are words. It's the word davar in plural, Devarim, words. Why would they call it the 10 words? Well, because in English, it should have been translated as categories, the 10 categories. Yes, categories, not commandments. The word devarim, the word devar, has no indication of commandment. It can be used because you write out a commandment with words, but beyond that, it's not a commandment. It's not a law. It's a category. So there are 10 categories. They're incorrectly known in the Western world as the 10 Commandments. So here's the first category. You shall not have other gods in my presence. It literally is God speaking to the people. So he said, you shall not have other gods in my presence, which is should tell you that there are other gods. Are they real? No, but they are gods. Well, some are real, because in the Bible times, human beings were called gods. If you were a king, you were called a god. If you were a man of high ranking, or if you were wealthy, in the Bible times, you were called a god with a little g, right? Elohim. The word Elohim was literally used of human beings. So there are other gods. You don't let your leaders be before God. You don't let people you love be before God. You don't become starstruck and let your movie stars be before God. You don't become enamored with some rich guy and let him become your God. You have no other gods in God's presence. Where can you go where you're not in God's presence? Nowhere. So you can't have other gods. Category number 2, you shall not make for yourselves three-dimensional images. That's what the word means in Hebrew. Three-dimensional images of any form that is in the skies above, which would be what? Birds. And that is in the earth beneath, that would be animals. Like teddy bears are forbidden. Yes, teddy bears are forbidden because it is a three-dimensional image of an animal that's on the earth beneath. And that is in the waters under the earth. So you can't have little carvings of fish and ducks and goats and things like that. You're not allowed to have that. Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. It goes on to say, you shall not bow down to them. Now he's talking about images. They don't have to be idols. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, Yahweh, your God, am a zealous, not jealous, but zealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth. That means to the third and fourth generations from the one, those who hate me. This is God talking, who hate me. Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. And showing mercy to the thousands. And in Hebrew, this doesn't mean there's only just a couple thousand people who love God. It's just saying that any given time, you're going to find thousands who love God and do what? They keep, God says, my mitzvot. That's the actual Hebrew word for laws. They keep my mitzvot. The Hebrews call that the 613 laws, 613 commandments. This is the first time the word commandment is actually used. So if you want God's mercy, you probably should keep his laws. I'm just saying, that's Exodus chapter 20, verse 6. There you have it, people. The law of God is to be kept according to the so-called 10 Commandments. So for those who say they keep the 10 Commandments and are not keeping the 613 laws, they are lying to man. And more importantly, they are lying to God. Ooh, that's a harsh one. And that's only law number 2. Category number 2. Here's the third category. You shall not lift up the authority, not the name, the authority of Yahweh, your God, in vanity. For Yahweh will not hold guiltless those who lift up his authority in vanity. Exodus 20 and 7. We're going through Exodus chapter 20, basically. But did you know that in the letter of Roman, you know it as Romans, chapter 7, verse 1, this is my translation of the Greek text. Are you negligent, brothers? For I speak to the doctors of the Torah. Now, it literally says those who know Torah. And every Jew, this was written by a Jew to Jews, because they're talking doctors of the law here. People who know the law, they're not talking about Gentiles, they're talking about Jews. And every Jew knew that if you said you knew the law, that meant you were a doctor of the law. So, for I speak to the doctors of the law, how that the Torah has dominion over the lives of every human being for all eternity. There will never come a time where the law passes away and has no dominion over people, because it's over people for all eternity. It will never go away. It has not gone away. It will not go away. Romans chapter 7, verse 1. All right. Category 4. Remember the Shabbat, that's the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Now we're in Exodus chapter 21, verse 8. And it goes on to say in verse 8, 6 days shall you serve and do all your occupational work. Verse 9 goes on, but the seventh day is the Shabbat. It's the Sabbath to Yahweh, your God. You shall not do any of your occupations, you, nor your sons, nor your daughters, nor your male servants, nor your maid servants, nor your cattle, nor the strangers within your gates. And that's a Hebrew idiom, basically. It means that anyone who lives in your house, who lives on a property that you own, anyone who works for you, who's working you've got a company, and since it's your company and you own it, that's within your gates. So your company cannot be open on those days, and your people cannot work on those days for you. Now, what they do in their own time for someone else or for themselves is completely their business, not yours. But you cannot have that happening from you. So because that's what they mean by within your gates. It goes on in verse 10. We're still talking the same law here. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. And on the seventh day he rested. Therefore Yahweh blessed the seventh day and made it, the seventh day, holy. There you have it. Absolute proof in the 10 Commandments that we are to keep the Sabbath on Saturday. How do I know? The first day of the week has always been Sunday. It's not the last day, it's the first day. The Saturday is the seventh day. People have begun to think of Sunday as the last day because you have the 2-day work week. That's more of an American thing than anywhere else. And so we tend to be the only ones who think this way. But ask anybody that's old enough, that's over the age of 50, and they'll be able to tell you that we were always being told that Sunday is the first day of the week. You can look it up in an old dictionary. Maybe, I don't know what a new dictionary will say, but I guarantee you the old dictionaries will tell you that the first day of the week has always been Sunday. So the last day, the seventh day, is Saturday. It has always been Saturday. Category 5, honor your father and your mother so that your days will be long upon the earth that Yahweh your God gives to you. 6, do not commit murder. It does not say do not kill. It says do not commit murder. That's a different thing. 7, do not commit adultery. 8, do not steal. 9, do not afflict your friends with lies. 10, this is a longer one. Do not covet your friend's house. Do not covet your friend's wife. Nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his he-donkey, nor anything that is your friend. That belongs to your friend, right? So please remain standing as we move on to today's verses. There's only 2. We begin with Yehezkel, or Ezekiel, chapter 1, verse 4. It says, Ba'ere dehine ruach sa'ara, ba'a min ha'zafon anan gadol de'esh mitlaka hat venoga lo saviv umitaha ke'ein ha'chashmal mitoch ha'esh. And our next one is from Shemot. That's, it is Exodus. I'm trying to say Ezekiel for some reason. Chapter 20, verse 18 says, V'chol ha'am ro'im et ha'kolot ve'et halapidim ve'et kol ha'shofar ve'et ha'har ha'shem bayar ha'am ba yanu'u ba ya'amdu merachok. And finally, Vayikra, or Leviticus 23, 15 through 21, but I'm going to read these in my translation in English. And you shall count to you from the day after the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering. Remember that happened in Pesach. 7 Shabbatot, that's Sabbath in plural, shall be complete. Even from the day after the 7th Shabbat, you shall number 50 days. That's why you hear the word Pentecost, Penta, 5, Pentecost, 50 days, 5 weeks. And you shall offer, is that right? 50 days, 7 weeks, right? Something like that. I can't do the math in my head. Whatever it is, the 5 comes from the 50. You shall offer a new meat offering to Yahweh. You shall bring out your habitations 2 wave loaves and 2 tenth deals. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits. So the first fruits we will wave tonight. They're 2 loaves of bread to Yahweh. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs without blemish of the first year, and 1 young bullock, and 2 rams. They shall be for a burnt offering to Yahweh, with their meat offering and their drink offering, even an offering made by fire, a sweet savor to Yahweh. Then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats for a Torah rebellion offering, for a sin offering, and 2 lambs of the first year for a sacrifice of peace offerings. And the Kohen shall wave them with the bread, the meat offerings with the bread of the first fruits, for a wave offering before Yahweh with 2 lambs. They shall be holy to Yahweh for the Kohen. In other words, this meat is strictly for the Kohen, not the people. And you shall proclaim on the selfsame day that it may be a holy assembly to you. You shall do no servile work therein. It shall be a statute forever. It doesn't say it'll be a statute until Jesus dies on the cross. It says it'll be a statute forever. Because think about it. If we don't have the sacrifice, do I get to eat tonight? I'm just saying. It should be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. Okay, you may be seated. Now we're going to begin with Yechezkel, that's Ezekiel, chapter 1, verse 4. Our first word was va'ire. It's and I looked. It's to see the face of a king is said of its ministers, or his ministers, who are receiving his presence. To see is used for the joy of the light, to live. Why do they say that? Well, they say that because there was a time when you entered the chamber of the king. He had a scepter in his hand, and when you walked in, if you moved it one way, you were taken out and killed, and if you moved it another way, you came into his presence. So if you came into his presence, you enjoyed the light of another day of living. I'm just saying. That's where that comes from. To see is used for the joy of light, to live. To see, in other words, to be taught in visions divinely brought, is said of the prophets. To see is to look at, to view, to behold. It's really kind of what you think of. But in the old days, it was to be pleased with the sight of something, as the eye lingers on objects of pleasure, and with them we feast with our eyes. To see about anything, to provide or care for. We're kind of not like that anymore. People seem to like to feast their eyes on the gory and the icky and the scary now, but there was a time when we feasted our eyes on the pleasant and the beautiful and the fair. All right. The next word is vehine. But behold, lo. And this is that word where you're trying to get somebody's attention on something. Generally, when we say behold or do some gesture like that, we're trying to get people to look at us. But hine in Hebrew is we're wanting to get someone's attention on something else. So, well, it's hard to do looking at a deal. I'm pointing at that thing behind me, right? Behold, the thing behind me. What's that called? What? What? No, I'm not pointing at a bookshelf. Picture frame. Behold the picture frame. I don't think I can get my hand twisted around to find the shelf. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to do. You're supposed to be looking at the picture frame, not me. Then it says, ruach. That's the spirit. That's the breath of the mouth, the breath of the nostrils from snuffing and snorting, the breath of air in motion, a breeze. The breeze of the day, the cool of the day, the cooler breeze that blows in the evening. That's the breeze of the day, the cool of the day, and God walked in the cool of the day, the ruach of the day. Say all that other stuff. And then it says Sa'ara. That's a whirlwind. It's it would be pronounced today Sarah. But so if you name someone Sarah, and you put the H on the end, and that means princess. But if you leave the H off and just Sara, then it's a whirlwind. It's like calling your daughter Stormy. Anyway, it's to be violently shaken, especially the sea agitated by storms, to be tossed by adversity, to rush upon like a storm. Just suddenly it was there. And then it says Ba'ah, which is come. It's from the word bo, to come, to enter. In Hebrew, to come is to go, and to go is to come. It's the same exact thing, because wherever you go, you came there, and wherever you came, you go there. I know it's confusing to people that speak English, but in Hebrew, there's only one word, and there's only one meaning, and it's just to go somewhere is to go from here to there, but it's also you went from here and arrived there. It's all the same thing. If you think about it, even in English, it's all the same thing. We just use different words. In Hebrew, they don't. The place which anyone enters, as in a house, a city, a country, a ship. To enter into a house as of a husband, said of a bride. She goes in, or he goes in. To enter into judgment with anyone, to bring before a tribunal. It's to go before a judge. To go out or to come in. A phrase describing the general course of life and action. So it could be even used of a way of life. Then our next word is mean. That means from. But it's a from. It's a part that's been taken from a whole. It's not just from. So if you can think of a pie and you cut it up, and you take a little slice from it, you've taken a part from the whole. Thus we get the word from. Then it says ha-zaphon. So it's from ha-zaphon. And that's the north. From the north. The north quarter, properly hidden. It's obscure, inasmuch as the ancients regarded the north as obscure and dark. The south, on the contrary, is clear and lighted by the sun. It's the old thing, right? Poetically, it's also used for the north wind and for the northern heavens, which is almost the same as for the heaven in general, as the greater part of the southern hemisphere is hidden. Our next word is anan. That means cloud. It's a cloud as covering and veiling over the heavens. So it's the idea of to cover, to veil over. It's a very large army as compared to a cloud. Large masses of people are called a cloud. A morning cloud is used of an image of something transient. It's fleeting, it's temporary, it's momentary, right? So there's a couple of ways that they use it. Basically, it's of the covering over, it's used of the fleeting of the morning, and it's used of great numbers, the word cloud. So when he comes in the clouds, we take it literally, of course, and think that he's going to walk around on white fluffy things. No, he's coming in the clouds. The numbers of those who have gone on before us are coming back with him, and the numbers are so great, they call it a cloud. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Then it says gadol, which means great. It's of magnitude, of extent, it's large, of number, it's of multitude. In Bereshit, or Genesis 29:7, it says, as yet the day is great. In other words, it's early in the morning. The day is great because there's plenty of day left. Or you could say the day is greatly diminished. It's dark. Get it? Most of the day is gone. They used it both ways. Then our next word is ve'esh. Literally, that means and fire. And the word esh imitates the sound of fire. Esh. It's the sound of when you have the fire on the altar and they took the wine and they poured it and it went shh. You hear that when you watch those guys cook on those flat. What are those things called? Those where they cook and it's flat. It's not really a stove. A grill? Yeah, it's a grill. Like a griddle. You pour something on the griddle and it goes shh, someone liquidy. That's the sound. It's used of the fire of God, often used of lightning, because that was seen as fire, and it caused fires. Figuratively used of the anger and wrath of God. Not because they saw God as throwing lightning bolts. That comes much later in history. People really didn't see it that way. It's that the lightning would start a fire. So since fire was connected to anger and the explosive kind of anger, rage, that's the word I'm looking for, they would say, well, then God's rage waxed hot. It was like a fire. In Devarim, or Deuteronomy 32:22, it says, a fire is kindled in my anger. In other words, my anger was very intense. Fire, though, when speaking of men or speaking of God in human terms, it's not to bring God down to being human, but we don't have terms for God and then terms for man. So we compare, we use our words that we use for men to give some kind of comparison, some way of talking about God. So when we're talking about God and talking about fire, there's a grammar rule in Hebrew that needs to be understood. It goes from being a literal fire to being a passion. And if you think about it, if somebody explodes into a rage, is that a literal fire or is that a passion? So do you follow what I'm saying here? And so when they talk about a human being, he was on fire, they're not really talking about a human being being on fire. They're talking about he exploded into a rage. And when they talk about God and his anger and his wrath, they're talking about rage. If you think about it, when God was talking to Moshe, you guys know him as Moses, he said, you better stand back because I'm so upset with the children of Yisrael that my anger, you may be consumed by the fire of my anger. Yeah, you may get killed with the rest of them. Poetically, fire is used of war, so that to be consumed with fires is compared to be destroyed by war, because the war it consumes the land, it consumes the people. Fire and burning are used in Hebrew to designate any destruction, whether of men or of things. So the men died because they were consumed by the army, or they burned down all the houses, so the houses were consumed by the fires of the army. I think you get it. Our next word is mitlakahat, and they use the word enfolding in the King Jimmy, which I guess was a word back in the day. It's not a word anymore. But it's to take, it's to stick together, to adhere, especially to take a wife. It's the word they use for glue, we should think of as glue. But enfolding, it's like, the idea here is more like when you're making a cake and you take your spoon and you're folding the stuff. What's that called? You're folding the food in on itself. Is it called? Folding. It's called folding. That's what you should be thinking of here. Venoga, it's and a brightness. It's shining. It's splendor as of fire. The sun when rising. Of the moon. Of a sword. The glistening in the sun. Of the glory surrounding God, the glistening light. Is from the root that means to shine, to be bright. And this is low. And this isn't a word. This is two sounds that have been put together. So it's to him. And then, or to it. Because the word for him and the word for it is the same word in Hebrew. Then it says savi, which is about it. It's the word circuit. It's route or course or track or path. It's to go in a circle. It's to come full circle, to come back to the place where you started. It's from a course from every side, round about. When they say round about, they're talking about being surrounded. But so something goes out and it comes back. This is the word. Now, Kohelet in Ecclesiastes, they give this example. Kohelet is the Hebrew word that we call it Ecclesiastes in America. Chapter 1, verse 6, it says, and the wind returns upon its circuit. So that's a whirlwind. It begins its course and comes back again. It's a whirlwind. Then it says, umitoha, which is and out of the midst. So out of the midst of the whirlwind. The midst is the middle of a thing, so called from its being divided. The middle part of a house, the interior court, in the middle of something. You get it? It's in the middle. So out of the midst. Then it says ke'ain, thereof, as of the color. As the ain is eye, right? It's an eye. But that the word of eyeball comes to the eyeball, the thing in your head. That comes from the idea of flowing, as in tears flowing from the eyes. And so they're called ain because it's flowing. So that's the place where the water flows is your eye. We follow that with hashmal, which is of amber. It's brass, made smooth. It's polished brass. It is mitoch, out of the midst. There's your word from the middle of something again. Then it says ha'esh, the fire, the passion when it's talking about humans. So here's my translation of Yechezkel, or Ezekiel, chapter 1, verse 4. And in his presence, and in the joy of his light, my eyes lingered on the vision, and behold, the violently shaking, stormy, rushing spirit entered in from out of the hidden northern heavens. A great veiling cloud and a raging, fiery passion joining to it, and the splendor like the brilliance of the rising sun raged brightly like a fire around it. And from out of the middle, it looked like polished brass, from out of the middle of the raging, fiery passion. Man, that's something, isn't it? And here's a literal translation of that same, not that same verse, but of another one. It's a literal translation of Shemot, Exodus chapter 20, verse 18. And all the people saw the thunderings, and the lightnings, and the noise of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. Very King James sounding, right? It's Exodus chapter 20, verse 18. Now consider a translation of this very same verse done in the same style as our previous verse. And in his presence and in the joy of his light, all the people's eyes lingered on the sight of the thunderous voice and the dancing flames of fire, and the thunderous voice of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when all the people's eyes lingered on it for a while, standing in his presence and in the joy of his light, they ran to and fro in sheer terror and resisted it, thrusting themselves far away. Very familiar ring, doesn't it? The Torah Club wrote the following in an article entitled The Voice of Fire. I got this off the internet years ago. It said, and I'm quoting them, so I'm not going to use all my Hebrew words like I normally do because I'm reading something they wrote. In Exodus 19 and 20, God steps down on Mount Sinai. He speaks the Ten Commandments in the hearing of all the people. And the end of the narrative, we read literally, and all the people saw the voices and the torches. We would normally smooth out, this is what it's called in linguistics, we would normally smooth out the Hebrew of verse 18 by translating the word say as heard, and by translating the word torches as lightning. Thus, we can paraphrase, and all the people heard the thunder and saw the lightning. The Hebrew text of Exodus 20:18 does not actually use the word thunder. Instead of thunder, the word kolot is employed. Kolot is the plural form of the Hebrew kol. As explained above, kol means voice. So the Torah literally says, and all the people saw the voices, because remember it's in plural. They go on to say, the sages, however, read the passage literally without our glasses. I disagree with that sentence. They did that, they read it literally because they're wearing hourglasses. But that, I digress. Let's go back to what they said. Based upon their literal reading of the Hebrew, the people saw voices and torches. What does it mean? The people saw voices. How does one see sound? How does one see a voice? Where did the torches come from? What are they? In Deuteronomy, they say, Moses retells the story of hearing God's voice at Sinai. In 10 different passages, he reminds Israel that they heard God's voice speak to them from out of the fire. Repeatedly, he says, you all heard the voice speaking from out of the fire. Regarding the fiery voice of God, the disciples of Rashi Ishmael applied a verse from they say Jeremiah. The verse says, "Is not my word like fire, declares the Lord, and like a hammer that breaks a rock in pieces?" How is God's word like fire? How is his word like a hammer? In explaining this verse, the disciples of Rabbi Ishmael vividly imagined God's voice at Mount Sinai to be like a sledgehammer breaking up stones, large stones. With each successive blow, a multitude of fiery sparks are scattered in every direction. The school of Rabbi Ishmael taught that the verse, "and like a hammer that breaks a rock in pieces," means that just as a hammer is divided into many sparks, so too every single word that went forth from the Holy One, blessed be he, at Sinai split up into 70 languages. Of course, they're getting this from the Mishnah in Shabbat 88b. Now they go on, according to their reading, the students of Ishmael, the voice of God at Mount Sinai not only split into 70 voices speaking 70 different tongues. Pay attention to this. But those voices were like hot sparks flying forth from a hammer's blow on stone. Is not his word like fire? The sages of the Midrash thought so. According to their interpretation of Exodus 20:18, all the people really did see the voice of God, and torches too, because the voice of God appeared to them like hot burning torches, as he spoke his words to shape as torches of fire. As he spoke, his words took shape as torches of fire. Consider the following passage from the Midrash says, an anthology of such legends. Something I can't read, I apologize. They go on and say, on the occasion of the giving of the Torah, the children of Israel not only heard the Lord's voice, but actually saw the sound waves as they emerged from the Lord's mouth. They visualized them as a fiery substance. Each commandment that left the Lord's mouth traveled around the entire camp and then came back to every Jew individually. These are some of the stories of Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, the Lord told Israel, "If you will hear my voice, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Israel not only heard the voice of God at Mount Sinai, they heard it in every language. They saw it too. His voice came to them as fire. So now let's look at something from the Seferim Sh'likhim. Specifically, let's look at Ma'asim at Acts chapter 2. And we're going to go through verses 1 through 15. They say, verse 1, and this is my translation of the Greek text. And when the day of Shavuot drew near, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there was a sound from heaven as a driving violent wind. And it filled all the hall, all the temple, where they were sitting. They were in the temple. This is a remez, a hinting back to this particular verse. It says, from the west they shall reverence the authority of Yahweh, and from the east his glory. The violent wind of Yahweh will drive on. That comes from Yeshayahu, or Isaiah, chapter 59, verse 19. Verse 3 says, and they saw their portion of languages as flames. Yes, that's really what the Greek text says. And they saw their portion of languages as flames. In other words, they saw the voices of God in their language. It came to them like flames. And it set down on each of them. Does it sound like the exact same thing? It should, because it was. Now, this is referencing to, obviously, and all the people saw the voices and the flames, and the sound of the shofar and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood far away. Shemot, or Exodus 20:18. When the children of Yisrael experienced the day of Shavuot at Sinai, it happened just after their exodus from the bondage of the Mitzrayim, from the bondage of Egypt. Just after they were released from their bondage, from their slavery in Egypt, they received the Word of God, the law of God, the categories, and much more, by the way, right after they were set free. Here in the second chapter of Ma'asim, the second chapter of Acts, we read about the exodus of the children of Yisrael from the four corners of the earth, which is also called the ingathering of his people. Verse 4, and all being filled with the Holy Torah. Remember, God calls the Torah his Holy Spirit. And all being filled with the Holy Torah. In other words, it's saying all of these people who are about to do something, the ones that received the fire on their tongue, they were doctors of the law. That's what they mean by they were filled with the Holy Torah, with the Holy Spirit. Also began to speak languages other than Hebrew, as they declared what the Torah, what the Spirit had given them. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem. This is really important. By the way, I'm saying Jerusalem because it's the word that is correct to the period. They say Yerushalayim now, but that's modern Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew is Jerusalem. It says there were dwelling at Jerusalem, Yehudim. That's Jews, by the way. And it says devout men. So what are they saying? They're saying Torah observant Jews. That's what they mean when they say devout men. This is Jews talking about Jews to Jews. So it means what they mean. Then it says out of every nation under heaven. He's just declared that this is the ingathering of God's people. Did it say that there was a whole bunch of Gentiles? No. Did it say there was mostly Gentiles? No. Did it say there were some Gentiles? No. One or two Gentiles? Nope. It said there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, Torah observant men out of every nation under heaven. Torah observant Jews out of every nation under heaven. This was the ingathering. All 12 tribes of Yisrael from every nation on the earth were gathered together in one place on the same day. The 12 tribes were no longer scattered. Verse 6, and when the sound of this came to the people, they were confounded, because everyone heard them speak in his idiot language. Yes, they said idiot. Idios is the word. Look it up. Why would they say that? Because any language for the Yehudim of the biblical period, any language other than Hebrew was a crude, vulgar, unrefined language. Thus, they called it an idiot language. And the translators, not knowing what that meant, said his own language. Well, it's not incorrect, is it? Because his own language is a language other than Hebrew. And did you know that up until this point in all of Jewish history, the law had not been taught in another language? Now you say, oh, but wait a minute. They had the Septuagint, blah, 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 blah. But the only people who used that, they didn't use that in the synagogues. Absolutely not. They used that. The philosophers used that. Not the Torah observant Jews like Yeshua, like Jesus and his Talmudim. They were all Torah observant Jews. Not those people. It was the Hellenized Jewish philosophers who used the Septuagint. People who didn't speak Hebrew. It was never used in the synagogue. But this day is the first time in all of Jewish history that for the first time these men are talking and teaching the Torah in all of these different languages. Verse 7, and they were amazed and marveled, saying, behold, are not all these which speak Galilean? Aren't they all Galileans? No, it's already told you that they're from all over the world, but you know how people get. Verse 8, and how can everyone hear in the idiot language of our birthplaces? In the non-Hebrew languages of our birthplaces, the idiot languages. And then they start naming them off. Eravon, that's the Parthians, and Madai, that's the Medes, and Elam, that's Elamites, and the dwellers in Aram Naharaim, that's Mesopotamia, and in Yehuda, that's Judea, and Eretz Tov Susim, I had to kind of make that up because I didn't know what the word really was, but it means the same thing as Cappadocia, however you say that, in Hayam, which is Pontus, and Kedem, that's Asia, by the way. Verse 10 says Harab, that's Phrygia, and Kol Shivte, that's Pamphylia. in Mitzrayim, that's Egypt, and in the parts of Put, which is Libya, about Ad Adon, that's Cyrene, and residents of Rome. Verse 11 says, Yehudim, Jews, and Gerim. They use the word in Greek, proselyuto. Do you hear proselyte? You should. Proselyuto. So here's the first time they're not naming Jews, because they're naming the Jews, the towns, the places where all the Jews came from. Now they say, and the proselyuto. What are proselytes in their day? Let's not worry about what they are today. Let's think about what they were 2,000 years ago. Proselytes were non-Jews converting to Judaism. They were converts. Then it says, Besarim, that's the Cretes, and the Arviim, the Arabians. Proselytes. We hear them speak in our languages the mighty works of God. So it's a remez, obviously, a hinting back to. Remez is the right way to say it. Hebrew word, and it means a hinting back. So they're hinting back to what? And it will come to pass in that day, the Lord will set his hand again a second time. That's the new sacrifice, by the way, that's spoken of in Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah 31 through 34. So he's going to do it again a second time to recover the remnant of his people, which remain from Ashur, Assyria, Mitzrayim, Egypt. This is starting to have a familiar ring to it. Patros, that's Pathros. And from Cush, that's Ethiopia. And from Elam, you remember that one? And from Shinar, that's Babylonia. They broke that up into other names, but those were all from Babylon. And from Hamath, they say, and the coastal islands of the sea. He just named off all the same things, right? It's obviously a remez, a hinting back to Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11. That's Yeshayahu to those of us who know the Hebrew word. Chapter 11, verse 11. It spoke about the day this would happen. Ma'asim, Acts chapter 2, verse 9 through 11, tells us that this was the day that it in fact happened. This proves beyond any reasonable doubt that the two-house teaching is absolutely, completely, and utterly false. The ingathering of the remnant has already taken place. It is not happening now. Also, we've just been told that there were no Gentiles present on this particular day. What happens when a Goim converts to Judaism? I've already told you. He is a proselyte while he is learning and becomes a Jew when he or she has completed his training. To be a Jew is to live according to the Torah. Judaism is a religion, not a bloodline. I know a lot of people are trying to make it a bloodline. They've always tried to make it a bloodline. It has never been a bloodline. It is a religion. So the only people present in that place on that day were the 12 tribes from the formerly scattered tribes of Yisrael and their Gerim, their converts, their proselytes. Verse 12, and they were all amazed and confused, saying one to another, what is this? But others mocked, saying, well, they're filled with wine. But Capa, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and said to them, men of Yehuda, and all who dwell in Jerusalem, be it known to you, and listen to my words, for these are not drunk as you suppose, for it is only the third hour of the day. Listen, people, this is the smoking gun. It is. He just fired a double barrel 50 caliber. He just fired the gun. Where would the Yehudim, where would the Jews be on this particular day, the day of Shavuot, at the third hour of the day? They would be in the Hay Hall. They would be in the temple, right where this all took place. Think about it. When they walk out of the upper room, there's 3,000 people. There was nobody in that time period that had a front yard big enough to hold 3,000 people. I'm just saying. And the rooms, the upper rooms at the temple were called the upper rooms. Just saying. Now let's take one more look at verses 2 through 4, translated in the same manner as the earlier verses, in that more flowery pattern. So Acts 2:2, Masim 2:2. And suddenly, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, there came to exist the thunderous voice of the violently shaking, crashing, stormy, rushing spirit entered in from the vast and infinite heavens, and it filled the Hall in the place where they were all sitting with an overflowing abundance. And in his presence and in the joy of his light, all the people's eyes lingered on the sight of the portion of language that appeared like a raging fiery passion resting on each of them. And they were filled with an overflowing abundance of the Holy Torah. And in different languages they began setting and ranging their words in a proper order as the Torah came to rest, raining down on them like sweet honey. The Torah was given at Sinai 50 days after Pesach. This evening is 50 days after Pesach. After the Yehudim, the Jews, were released from captivity in Mitzrayim in Egypt, and was written on tables of stone. That's the first one, right? Then the Torah was once again given 50 days after the sacrifice of the ultimate Pesach lamb. But this time, it was to be placed on the mind and written on the heart instead of stone tablets. When God first moved into the secret place, which was the Holy of Holies, in the Ohel, that's the tent, and eventually in the Hall, the temple, his presence was experienced by precious few. When the fire came down on Shavuot, the presence of God sat down on the mercy seat of their tongues, because his Torah was written deep inside the secret place in their hearts, not ours. You see, they were trained in the Torah. They were ready to go out and reach the rest of the Yehudi, or Jewish world, with the good news that God had reconciled his covenant with his people at the cross. The Torah is not written on our hearts and minds through the process of osmosis or by some secret knowledge given to us by the infilling of the third person of a pagan trinity, which was never spoken or written about until after the time of Jerome in the late 300s CE. God's law is written in our hearts and minds after we have learned it and have come to love God enough to live it out in our day-to-day lives. Those who are touched by the fiery passion of God's Torah are forever changed. As the fiery passion touched the 120 who were there that day, they spoke proper words, arranged in a very specific order, not because God was dictating what they should say, but because they were fully trained rabbim, and it was time to spread the good news of the gospel. The gospel being our God reigns, idiomatically, which literally means God has reconciled his covenant with Yisrael. That's the gospel. As they preached the good news, the gospel was like a fiery passion dancing on their tongues. The Feast of Shavuot has always been a celebration of the giving of the Torah. The evidence that the Torah is in our hearts and written in our minds is seen through our obedience to it. If we love God with all our heart, soul, and strength, we will not serve other gods. We will not have graven images. We will not take his authority in vain. We will remember to keep his Shabbat day holy. We will honor our father and mother. We will not commit murder. We will not commit adultery. We will not steal things. We will not bear false witness. We will not covet our neighbor's house and his stuff. If we see our neighbor in need, we will help him, even if it means we have to pull a big old ox out of the ditch. Why? Because we are filled with God's passion, and that's what his Torah has always done to those who are filled with it. And now, because Mashiach restored God's covenant with the Yehudim, with the Jews, the Goyim, the Gentiles, can experience that which the Yehudim once had and lost, but now will have forever. Will you accept the fiery passion of God right here, right now? Will you let God fill you with the Holy Torah? If so, reach up and receive the fiery passion of God. Shalom, Beshalom.